Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Okay, there we go, switch to a slide. Okay, hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Tony. Yes, I did speak to SCiO about 2 years ago, but I think I might have spoken at the very last face-to-face event in Manchester. I was, just to say who I am, I've worked for many years as a learning and development consultant, mainly in the international organizations in the humanitarian and development sectors. And that's been about designing, delivering, and evaluating learning programs. Then between 2011 and 2017, I studied on the OU's master's program, Systems Thinking and Practice. So that's contextualizing my particular take on systems thinking. When I started to slide into semi-retirement about 2 or 3 years ago, I thought it'd be a good opportunity to keep my academic studies going. So I enrolled for a part-time PhD with the Open University. And when I spoke to SCiO maybe 3 years ago, that's what I was doing. So I spoke at that time about some research that I was doing into using systems thinking tools to evaluate organizational training. And I talked that day about using critical systems heuristics, which was the tool I thought I was going to be using. Anyway, after that, things changed quite a bit. Basically, I decided that doing the PhD wasn't going to be the best use of my time. I felt like I was going to be studying a smaller and smaller subject, and it would end up producing a thesis, which was going to be read by, half a dozen people. And the research I was doing to prepare for that, my supervisors had said I needed to read more widely, to look at, sort of read around the subject. And as I read, I started to find things that seem more interesting and valuable to my own learning and development practitioner community. That is, looking at how learning and development could contribute to organizations that are trying to operate more sustainably. So I abandoned the PhD and decided to repurpose the whole 2 years of research that I'd done to write a practitioner-oriented book about sustainability and learning and development. My researcher told me there was nothing in the practitioner market about the subject, and I approached Routledge about it. They agreed and gave me a contract to write the book. So anyway, over the last 9 months, I've just about finished the whole thing, and over the next 3 or 4 weeks, need to finalize the manuscript so that I can send them off. So, so I'm talking to you all this evening, and it's great timing because I'm open to any suggestions about how I can improve a specific part of what I've written so far. I'm going to put a link up shortly, which is to the specific chapter in the book, which looks at how to identify content for what I call a sustainability focused learning program using our old friend VSM. So that means my content is kind of like amber. Really, it's not green because it's not out in the public domain yet. It won't be a book until sometime probably next spring, next summer. But I'm going to release this one chapter to you because I'm interested to see if anybody's interested in reading it and giving a bit of feedback sometime in the next week. So I'll come back to that shortly. So what I want to talk about is one particular piece of my research about using VSM to contribute to a learning needs assessment process for sustainability focused learning. So to start with, to make sure we all know what I'm talking about, I just want to define sustainability. It's a word which means different things to different people. My starting point is this definition that we see here, which is one put forward by the World Commission on Economic Development in 1987, on the environment and development, sorry, who said that sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So WCED was a UN-sponsored body of experts that was commissioned after the UN Conference on Environment and Development, which was held in Rio de Janeiro in 1982. So that's the basic definition. And since that time, there have been hundreds of other definitions put forward about sustainability by different people with different interests. So a lot of disagreement about what sustainability is, but generally an agreement that sustainability has three, what I'm calling dimensions: environmental, social, and economic. They're often talked about by metaphors such as the three pillars of sustainability, but I think that's a problem for various reasons. One is that there's no real agreement what each of the three really means, exactly what environmental sustainability is, what economic sustainability is, for example. And also to talk about something like pillars suggests that they're clearly defined and kind of separate, whereas in actual fact, they're interlinked, that economic, environmental and social factors are constantly interacting. So for that reason, I rather like this triple helix idea that was put forward a few years ago, which shows how the three are interlinked and that they change over time. So I'll talk a little bit about what sustainability is, and then I'll go on to look at what it means in an organizational context. And that will allow me then to move into a discussion about what that means about learning about sustainability. So environmental sustainability is probably what people generally associate with the term of sustainability. It's the one that attracts most attention. We talk about, increasingly you talk about the climate emergency, about climate change, about carbon dioxide emissions, about biodiversity, etc. One way of looking at this from quite a holistic perspective is this diagram of the planetary boundaries, which was put forward by the Stockholm Resilience Centre back in 2009 by Johan Rockström and a sort of a very large team of eminent scientists. And they suggested that we could look at the way the environment works according to 9 systems in operation, which have particular boundaries, and that if we damage those systems beyond a certain point, beyond boundaries, then this can have catastrophic effects. So to date, 3 of those have been transgressed. We've crossed the boundary for climate change, for the rate of biodiversity loss, and also for the interference with the nitrogen cycle. 4 of them are threatened. So that is freshwater use, land use, ocean acidification, and the phosphorus cycle. And there are some of these boundaries we really, even the Stockholm Resilience Centre don't really know what a safe threshold is. Social sustainability is a harder one to nail down, partly because it raises big political issues about how societies work. Nevertheless, one concept which seems to be emerging is that there are 3 general factors to take into consideration with social sustainability. That is meeting basic needs, ensuring that human rights are respected, to ensure that social cohesion is generated, is maintained, and also to ensure social equity. The third of the dimensions, economic sustainability, is probably the most problematic, because if we talk about economic sustainability, it kind of suggests that what we're trying to do is to keep the economy going, which in itself is fair enough, but it does tend to suggest that we need to keep it going in the way that it is going at the moment, which is a kind of a hard-edged global capitalism. And the problem with sustaining that system is that that is the system that has got us into the mess we are currently in. So it's preferable in my way of thinking to talk about sustainability economics, thinking about how economics can be redesigned so that it provides a more effective and efficient way of society and the environment interacting, so that it can actually keep us going to protect future generations. So this is a big and complicated political subject. It brings in issues about the difference between neoliberalism and sustainability economics. To me, a fundamental problem with neoliberalism and neoclassical economics is that they're based on certain principles, which, if we think back to Stafford Beer's words of the purpose of a system is what it does, then the purpose of the neoclassical system is to create the environmental and social complications that we're faced with at the moment. So neoclassical economics relies on the marketplace for making decisions. So that ignores externalities of such things as pollution and carbon dioxide emissions. It relies on social inequality to keep people working. It's based around economic efficiency. So it reduces the redundancies that provide resilience when the shit hits the fan. So for example, in 2007, when we had a global economic collapse, we had to call in government support to keep the economy going. In 2020, when we had the COVID-19 pandemic, again, neoclassical economics was completely unable to keep things going. So again, the government had to step in with a return to Keynesian economics. Neoclassical and neoliberalism rely on the protection of intellectual property, which makes it much harder for the kinds of global scale solutions that we're going to need to be disseminated, because decisions are made by the marketplace. Neoliberal economics has no ethical basis, because it's assumed that the ethics of any particular situation will be sort of baked into the price of things. Neoclassical economics also relies on the assumptions about continuous growth. And the problem is that that implies infinite resources, which, as we live on a closed system, on a planet which is flying through space, we are a closed system, we are finite, and so it's constant, no end to growth is not possible. So we have sustainability economics, which is so represented by such things as the various manifestations of the Green New Deal that are around, the British version, the American version. We have ideas such as Kate Raworth's Donut Economics, which is a book which came out a number of years ago and which seems to have caught some element of the popular imagination. So those are different ideas that are floating around in economic sustainability. And of course, organizations have a key part to play in all of these dimensions. That's a diagram that I put together, which attempts to summarize from a systems perspective how organizations work. We see that they interact with their social environment, with their natural environment, and with the financial environment. You can see that they're drawing in labor and resources from the natural and social environments in return for financial returns. So that's my starting point for looking at an organization as a system. So how does sustainability apply to organizational practice? First of all, in terms of economic sustainability, I think we can look at it in two ways. We can look at internal economic sustainability, and that is generally the approach which most academic research takes. Internal economic sustainability is what can an organization do from a sustainability perspective to maintain its profitability. And that's really what we would call the viability of the organization. But then there is also this idea that you can look at economic sustainability of an organization from an external perspective, which is thinking about what its impact on the external economy is. And this is an idea which gets much less traction. So by that, I think a good example is looking at the problem of pharmaceutical companies marketing highly addictive opioid painkillers. These have a medical benefit, but certainly in the United States, they've had a huge negative impact on society, which of course has an economic cost. So the question there is whether or not we're talking about economic or social sustainability, as we can look at it from either perspective. So to me, the more important things to focus on are how an organization can be environmentally and socially sustainable in a way that ensures its financial viability. So organizations and environmental sustainability. On this slide, I'm drawing on the principle of the 9 planetary boundaries. So what we need to consider is how an organization's activities actually have an impact on all of those boundaries, on the biodiversity loss, on chemical pollution, on the use of land, on freshwater use, etc. All the way up to at a global, at a planetary scale, climate change, stratospheric ozone, and ocean acidification. In terms of social sustainability, 2 considerations. Again, we've got internal and external. So in terms of basic needs, social cohesion and social equity, from an internal perspective, we need to think about what an organization does with its workforce. How well does it look after its workforce in order to meet those basic needs? What are the ways in which it responds to the different needs of different groups on the basis of gender, of age, of sexuality, of religion, that sort of thing. In terms of external social sustainability, what does an organization do to actually maintain the basic needs, social cohesion and equity of the society within which it operates? Okay, so so to try to make some sense of all that, I looked at a lot of the different theories of the firm which organizational theorists talk about. So we have here, for example, we have stockholder theory, social contract theory, institutional theory. All of those, the people who've written about those subjects come up with different ideas about what the implications might be for sustainability. So stockholder theory talks about the investability of sustainability. How can we make sustainable sort of attractive from a shareholder's point of view? Institutional theory talks about how an organization needs to interact with the environment within which it operates. So there we have considerations about regulatory pressure, about the political economy within which it's operating, about the economic opportunities that the institutional landscape provides. So those are external perspectives on how an organization operates. And then I looked at resource-based view theories of how firms operate. From my perspective as a learning and development consultant, the resource-based view theories are more interesting because they focus on how an organization can strengthen its internal resources in order to respond to the situations that it's operating in. So to me, the resource-based view, looking at that and how those match up against these drivers created by the external world, create a number of learning opportunities, such as, for example, how can sustainability increase or maintain profitability? How can learning opportunities address value frameworks to meet ethical pressures, philanthropic requirements? How can learning opportunities deal with innovation? How can they develop new business models and so on? So from that kind of theoretical analysis, that gave me a lot of ideas about what learning might need to take place within an organization. One of the issues I kind of dealt with, tried to think about next, was the fact that actually there are many different levels and ways in which organizations can approach sustainability. So to try and develop a workable framework, I came across research which identified essentially 3 different strategies based on the idea of being a compliant organization, which I'm calling level 1. These are organizations which simply make sure they comply with the regulatory requirements of where they're operating. Level 2 are strategic organizations, strategists, and they are the organizations that see economic and social sustainability as a way of developing a competitive advantage. So essentially, those are organizations which are exploiting what they know. They're sticking to their knitting to a large extent. And they're engaging in what, Chris Argyris, Donald Schoen call single loop learning. They're not really questioning any of their basic assumptions. But then we move on to level 3 organizations, which I call the visionaries. And these are the organizations which kind of turn things on its head. Rather than looking at how can we make a profit out of being sustainable, these visionary organizations are the ones which are seeking to strengthen economic and environmental and social sustainability, and are just trying to make sure that they remain economically viable, to make sure they've got enough money to keep coming in so that they can continue to meet what is actually their primary purpose. So there are a lot of different ideas floating around. So I've got my model here of the 3 different types of organization. I've got all these drivers. I read quite a few articles about using the VSM. Marcus Schwanninger, the Swiss academic, has done quite a bit of work on cybernetics and sustainability. I read a few papers about data requirements for VSM. And from that, I started to try to think about how our good old friend, the viable system model, might work for these compliers, these strategists, these visionaries. And I also, because of the recursive qualities of VSM, I thought, well, actually, how does that work at an organizational level? How does it work at a team level? And how does it work at an individual level? And from that, I was able to, this is where I need to go into my share screen. That's the right one to share. Okay, so I hope that you can now, it says participants can now see my application. So I hope that what you're now looking at is a table. What it is if I just sort of scroll through this, you'll see I've got 3 tables here. Each one of these tables is one level within an organization. So this is the organizational level. And what I'm trying to do here is to look at how the different systems, S1, S2, S3, S3 star, etc., how sustainability feeds into a level 1 organization. So an organization which is trying to comply with regulations. So from an S1 perspective, its primary activities need to comply with all regulatory requirements. For a strategic organization, a level 2 organization, it'll of course need to comply with regulatory requirements, but also it'll need to produce products and services which contribute to sustainability and improve organizational competitiveness. For a level 3, a visionary organization, these primary activities will need to enhance social and environmental sustainability. So what we're saying is that, I'll just pause, I'm just putting something in the chat. What we're saying is that we can actually think about what content is needed for organizations that want to operate sustainability by going back to the theory, going back to the basic principles of theories of the firm and what sustainability means. And we can then pull that together using VSM, because it's just such a powerful tool for looking at how organizations function. So I've got, like I said, I've got 3 of these tables. I don't feel it's kind of it's slightly tedious to go through these in detail because there's a lot of information in them. So I've got one table for organizational level. This is a table for the team level. And this is a table for the individual level. And what I've tried to do is to synthesize all of this research that I've done into what needs to happen in an organization in order to be sustainable. I've tried to to think about what are the content requirements for that, and then map that into a VSM structure. Now, like I say, it's kind of too much and too tedious to go through all that in much detail, but you know, at the end of the presentation, I'm very happy to you know, to sort of take questions on that. But also, what I've done is, I just only sent it to Tony. I need to send it to everybody. What I've done is I have pasted a link to this chapter that you're looking at on the screen now, where you can download it. Now, like I say, you know, the book is getting towards completion. But if you're interested and you want to have a look through this, and if you want to give me a bit of feedback or suggestions about what I might want to change, what I might want to add, you know, where I'm going wrong, it's always quite possible. Please, if you could download it, have a read through, and just email me some feedback sometime in the next week, because in 2 weeks' time, I've got to bundle all this up and send it off to the publisher. So any feedback over the next week about sustainability in VSM would be very welcome. Okay, so those are my VSM tables. Okay, so coming back to my slide, here we go. So what my presentation here is talking about is about the content. And VSM is great for us working out what the content is. But of course, in terms of a learning strategy, we also have to think about mechanisms. How do we actually deliver the learning? Through formal training, through supporting informal learning, through action learning, after event reviews, through the various other ways in which people can actually learn within organizations. And what are the principles that we have to apply? The principles is important because often when we're talking about learning within organizations, we think in a very performative way. We think about simply telling people what they need to do and hoping that they then go away and do it. But one of the problems with sustainability from my studies of the subject is that it's very much a values-based subject. But if people don't really buy into the whole idea about sustainability and recognize that actually this is going to require, sort of pretty major changes in the way in which we live our lives, then we're not going to get anywhere. So a sustainability focused learning strategy needs to be very holistic and to see learning as a system. So what I'm doing with it is also to use critical systems heuristics to make boundary judgments about what content is important, what is not important, what mechanisms should be used, what mechanisms are, why are we making decision not to use certain mechanisms for learning? What are the important principles that we need to follow in terms of learning? About 20 years ago, some Dutch researchers came up with what has got a very grand title of the European Corporate Sustainability Framework. It was a European funded research project, which unfortunately seems to have kind of died a complete death because while there were a few papers written about it 20 years ago, not very much has been discussed since. But it's kind of interest because it's very much based around the idea of values. So the idea is that an organization and the people working within it can be seen to to adopt a certain pattern of values. So for example, if we think about the third one here, the success, according to the ECSF, an organization may be focused around success, but that as its level of consciousness about sustainability rises, it may then think that actually success is not so important as a value, but actually it is more important to embrace the idea of community. But again, as consciousness rises, it may then move to a stage where moving on from community, it then sees the importance of synergy, of collaboration, of working together. So to me, ECSF and its value framework is quite an interesting way of actually thinking about this whole issue about learning principles. Is how do you actually deliver learning, facilitate learning within an organization in a way which helps to shape and reorient people's values to one which is more accepting, more welcoming of the challenge of sustainability. So that's it for my presentation. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll now hand it over to yourselves for any questions.
Thanks, Brian. Really interesting. There's been a few bits of chat going on, of course, in the background while you've been talking. And a couple of questions, firstly from Barbara Schmidt-Abbey. One about the, curious about how this relates to the economic growth paradigm, the limits to growth ideas, but also around the distinctions between compliance, strategic and visionary. What's that based on? So if you don't mind responding to both, they'd be quite useful, so good questions.
Yeah, well, you know, one of the challenges with, you know, one of the reasons why I kind of abandoned my plan for PhD was because I found it quite difficult to actually work across different disciplines. You know, what I think the whole PhD process is designed to do is to create experts in very specific subjects. And I just found I was looking at a lot of different subjects, all of which had different terminologies, different ways of looking at things, but it actually, to a large degree, we're actually talking about the same thing. So, for example, there were so in some literature, they were talking about traditional, transitional, and transformational organizations. But that, you know, then there are other other literatures which use a different terminology for talking about those things. So, for example, you know, the idea of exploitation and exploration is another one. So I decided to stick with the 3-level framework and actually come up with my own terminology, which was based around what, you know, traditional, transitional, and transformational were essentially about. Traditional organizations were ones which were, you know, doing the absolute bare minimum. You know, they were doing what they had to do because the law said that you weren't allowed to, you know, sort of pour toxic chemicals into the river anymore. So they were complying. Then there are the strategists, and, you know, we see plenty of examples of that. Organizations which, you know, now market themselves as being green, you know, that they are, you know, the packaging, you know, they, instead of wrapping everything up in, you know, plastic, which, you know, cannot be recycled, it's biodegradable, that they're using paper, they're finding, you know, sort of market niches in order to embrace sustainability and to make themselves, you know, viable in that way. But then you have, you know, organizations which are committed to actual, you know, social change and environmental sustainability, you know, the social enterprises of the world. And so that's where this idea of the 3 levels came from. I mean, I felt like it was important, you know, to create a model. You know, what's the old saying about, you know, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And by having 3 levels, it actually makes it all much more manageable. So, you know, what I hope is that people are reading the book will actually say, well, I think we're kind of like a sort of, you know, a level 2 organization. I think it makes it more manageable for somebody to understand, well, how to use this material if they can kind of position themselves somewhere on a model. So accepting that actually, you know, many organizations will have elements of level 1, level 2, level 3, you know. Some organizations, big organizations, may have some divisions which are operating at one level. Other divisions are operating at a different level. So, you know, it's kind of, I think, you know, there's always an element of reductionism that goes on with making a model. But, you know, I think in the interest of making it usable and easier to kind of get your head around, I think it's kind of important to do that.
Brian, thank you. Patrick Highland. Patrick, you had your hand up. Did you have a question for Brian?
Yeah. So Brian, thanks very much. Very interesting. I really enjoyed looking at the model.
Yeah.
Bryan, the three levels, so the compliance level, the strategy level, and the visionary level. Just looking at those levels and also reflecting on your slide that showed sort of Chris Agris's single loop learning versus double loop learning.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the strategist level is more about maintaining competitive advantage within the current system and or the governing parameters of the current system. The visionary level, you were talking about it being something else, sort of changing, some sort of social change.
Yeah.
So really, my question is, are you putting this model together as a tool that practitioners can use to run as a diagnostic on specific organizations? Or is it in order for those organizations to sort of move between the levels, perhaps? That's the one piece. But the other piece is, how do we properly understand the motivations of the organizations that are operating at the visionary level? Because there could be a multitude of different motivations for changing the social system. And I mean, how can we get a grip around the perspectives in that space? It probably ties into critical systems heuristics.
Yeah.
But to what ends, really? I mean,
yeah. Right. Okay. There's a few questions. Okay. To come back to the model here, I kind of see it as a heuristic in itself, as a thinking device, rather than being a kind of a diagnostic tool. I think it's kind of useful as a way of actually, for somebody, the people who I'm kind of writing this for are essentially HRD people involved in learning and development, not necessarily people working in sustainability. So, a chief sustainability officer would hopefully find it useful from a learning point of view. An HRD person, which is my community, would, they'll understand stuff about learning and development, but the whole thing about sustainability will be a little bit more of a mystery to them. So what I wanted to do with this was actually to provide a way in for somebody to think about where my organization is, so that I can then sort of think about what kind of level of learning I need to really be thinking about. Then there was a second part, which I thought of an answer to your question, but I've got my question.
It was about the motivations.
Oh, the motivation. Yeah. Well, I think the motivation, if we come back to this one here, I think there's many reasons why organizations will be motivated to go for sustainability. I mean, there are the regulatory requirements, which is where the compliant organizations will be most interested. There'll be the strategist organizations will be thinking, well, how can we make our organization more attractive from an investor's point of view? So that will be a motivation there. There will be, stakeholder theory talks about the importance of taking into consideration the people who have a stake in your organization. So that will be customers. So increasingly we're seeing, organizations, who are targeting particular, sort of sectors in the population, because they know that the green pound, we talk about the green pound, is getting more important. And there's also employees, more and more employees are, particularly younger people, better educated, more socially aware employees are starting to press for sustainability. I mean, there was an interesting story from about 2018. Some of you may have heard about it. It's to do with Google. Google got an artificial intelligence project with the Pentagon in the United States to use its facial recognition technology in for military applications. So the idea being that, somebody's walking down the street, a drone up in the sky using Google technology, spots that person, recognizes them as a threat to society, and so shoots them dead. Okay, well, employees at Google decided that wasn't ethically acceptable, and so they effectively, they went on strike, and they said to Sundar Pichai, he said, "This is not acceptable. We're not prepared to work on this." And so Google abandoned the project. One of the other IT companies picked it up and said, "Thank you very much." But anyway, I think it's interesting that actually, if enough people within an organization, if enough employees say, "This doesn't fit in with my particular code of values," then organizations need to respond to that. So, your question was about motivation. I think there's multiple reasons why sort of organizations will be sort of working towards being more sustainable.
Okay, thanks guys.
Right.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Patrick. I have two questions, and I think that'll be two quick questions. I'll have to be in quick answers because we're kind of running out of time. But Robin and David, you both had your hands up. Who wants to go first?
I was first.
It'll have to be quick.
Yeah. I happen to have started last week, with a new contract for BP, British Petroleum, and one of my functions and roles within the team is capability management. They are building a new team for offshore wind bidding to win contracts around the world, to win sites. One of the things I have to do is to develop the criteria against which individuals and teams and the organization is measured. Right. So this is exceedingly relevant to me. Yeah. The question is, how have you considered, or have you considered how to measure this to actually get some numbers out of it and provide a dashboard to the chief execs?
Yeah, well, there are. There's a lot of different measurement schemes out there. Perhaps the one which, gets the most traction is, the idea of the triple bottom line, which is the idea of measuring economic sustainability, social sustainability, and environmental sustainability, and put them in the bottom line of your balance sheet. To me, it's kind of a great idea, sounds nice, but the tricky thing is that it's, I'm sure there's a lot of people here who will remember Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and the deep thought computer that spent millions of years trying to work out the answer to life, the universe, and everything. And I won't sort of insult your intelligence by telling you what the answer is, but that's a bit like what the triple bottom line is, okay? But then there are other measures as well. There is the Global Reporting Initiative, the GRI, which has got a number of different standards against which sustainability can be measured. There's different other measures that financial institutions use in order to assess the sustainability of an organization. So there's quite a lot of different measures out there.
If we take your three tables and your mapping against the VSM, should we not be trying to measure the performance of the VSM at the individual team and corporate level?
Yeah, actually, that what I've just showed you there is chapter 5 in the book, which is about identifying the content. By the time you get to chapter 9, I believe, we talk about the evaluation of learning. I'm not writing a book about sort of organizational sustainability and how you measure that, but I kind of do refer to how it is, the different ways in which organizations do try to claim that they're sustainable. I am interested in how learning connects to that organizational impact. But that is always kind of highly problematic, because people learn, we've all been to training courses where at the end of the day, you get a sort of questionnaire to fill out to say, was the room too warm? Did you get enough chocolate? What was the presenter like? All that kind of stuff. And there's this theory which, is kind of just not really sort of particularly worth thinking about, but actually that if you actually like training, that you will learn, and if you learn, you'll then go and change your behavior, and if you then change your behavior, then the organization will do a whole lot better. But that's a chain of causality which doesn't really hold water, particularly because by the time you get to organizational changes, there's so many other factors. You know, it's a complex adaptive system is one way of looking at it. So all we can do when we're looking at sort of a sustainability focused learning strategy is to try to identify some plausible connections between what people learn and how the organization becomes more sustainable.
Right,
but that's an argument which applies, you know, whatever the subject of your learning is. Okay. So, you know, when I write about it in my chapter on evaluation, I refer to, you know, the GRI, the triple bottom line, and other measures, and say that if an organization is keeping data about those, if it can actually see that there's been a change in sustainable practice since the learning strategy has been implemented, then it's a matter of trying to put together a kind of a chain of plausible connections which show that learning is having an effect.
Thanks, Brian. I'm conscious a couple of comments have come in as well, which Robin, you might find useful on GRI. And the other thing is, if you want to bring it, if it's still floating around, Dev Day session, possibly, Robin? Might be worth bringing that one to the table. See what I just want to be fair and make sure that David has a chance to answer his question, because I'm conscious of time.
It's going to be very, very quick, Brian. Firstly, I'm going to make 2 points, and my question will have a binary answer. Right. My first point is to commiserate with you, because my daughter has just finished a PhD on the sustainability impact of pension funds, and she had the same problem as you. There were so many disciplinary contributions to it, it drove her mad, taken her 5 years. So I commiserate with you. The second point is simply that she focused on deliberation theory, as well as the theories you've talked about, as well as stakeholder. She talked about deliberation theory as an important element. And if you're interested in that, I can send you some thoughts on that. Yeah,
I've not heard of deliberation theory. I mean, I felt like I had theories coming out of all my ears at one stage, but that's not one that I've actually come across.
It's all about citizen engagement in you know, citizen panels, all the different ways of getting people together to agree.
Sounds like it's connected with stakeholder theory, and I'm sure that it would draw on those ideas. But yeah, I'd be interested if you've got something. I'm always kind of.
I can send something to you on it.
Explore new ideas. Yeah, great. Yes.
Thanks, David. Appreciate that.
Binary answer is yes, please.
Okay.
Okay. So thank you for all the questions and all the discussion, and thank you to both Ilya and Brian for your presentation.